November 1249. There is a war camp in Mansura in the Nile Delta, and in the middle of the camp there is a tent, and in the tent the Sultan of Egypt is being served dinner. Servants carry food in and out. Doctors come and go looking appropriately concerned. Documents flow out of the tent with the Sultan's signature on them. Orders, decrees, troop assignments. Anyone watching would tell you the Sultan is ill, but clearly governing. However, the Sultan is dead, actually. And he has been dead for days, and he's going to stay dead. And the dinners are going to keep arriving for almost 3 months. The person sending dinners in, forging signatures, and quietly running the most powerful state in the Islamic world, while a French king marches up the Nile with a crusader army, is a woman whose name means Tree of Pearls. She was bought as a slave at a slave market. Within a year from this moment, she will be the Sultan, not the Sultan's wife, not the regent, the Sultan. There are coins, real ones. You can look at them at museums. This goes exactly the way you think it will, which is to say, it ends with a king of France in chains, a corpse on a riverbank with its heart cut out, and a murder weapon that is a pair of bathhouse shoes. Okay, let's get into it. Here is everything we know for certain about Shajar ad and where she came from. Basically, nothing. She was from somewhere around the Black Sea steppe, probably. Maybe Armenian. Nobody wrote down her actual name because she was not the kind of person people wrote down yet. Shajar Ador, Tree of Pearls, is what she got called, which is a beautiful name if you ignore the part of where it means her entire existence was something somebody owned, which we should not ignore. She was purchased by a man named Al Ayub. The family name should ring a bell. The Ayyubids are the dynasty of Salad. Actually, let me stop there. Al Sahir is one of Saladin's descendants, and by 1240, he is the Sultan of Egypt. The Ayyubids spend most of their time stabbing each other, literally, which is kind of the family business, and we are about to see it reach its absolutely unhinged conclusion. So, back to her. She enters as a concubine, which is a legal status, not just a situation. She has Al Sahil's a son named Kahil. The moment that happens, the law changes. You cannot sell a woman who has borne you a child, and she gets freed when you die. Khalil, unfortunately, dies as an infant, but the title stays with her for the rest of her life. She will be Khalil, the mother of the dead baby. For the rest of her life, though, everything that is about to happen, she will call herself Kahil, mother of Kahil. Hold on to that because she's going to do something extraordinary with a dead infant's name. Yeah. Al Sahil trusts her more than he trusts almost anyone else. Given his family, the bar is actually really low. Like basement. Like maybe under the basement. Maybe it's foundation. The Ayyubids spent their energy scheming against each other. At one point, before he took the throne, Al Sahil was betrayed by his own cousin and locked in a fortress at Karak for about a year. Shajar al Durr stayed with him in the confinement by choice, which is either love or the single shrewdest long-term investment in this entire story. And it does not have to be the only one of those. When he came out and took Egypt, she came out as the person the Sultan actually listened to. and he eventually freed and married her. One more piece on the board. Al-Sahil does not trust his family. See above, kind of killing each other off. So instead, he buys thousands of boys from the steppe, converts them, trains them to be the best cavalry riders you have ever seen, and parks them in a fortress on an island in the Nile. They are called the Bahri Mamluks. The Bahri means the Nile. They are slave soldiers, and they are about to own Egypt. Remember them, because this story is about to be an ensemble piece where the enslaved people are the only ones who survive, which I find kind of cool. Let's go on to June of 1249. King Louis, the ninth of France, the most pious monarch in Europe, the man who is literally be made a saint, lands in the Mida on the Egyptian coast with a crusader army. The strategy is simple. Take Egypt, trade it for Jerusalem, and at first it works horrifyingly well. The garrison at the Mida panics and runs, and Louis takes one of the strongest fortified cities in Egypt in about a day. It is generally difficult to lose a fortress faster than this, seriously, but they managed. They did. This should not have happened. And the reason it happened is that Egyptian state is secretly paralyzed because Al-Sahil is dying. He is at the war camp in Masura, being carried on a litter, wasting away from tuberculosis and an abscessed wound, trying to organize a defense from a sickbed. In late November 1249, with the Crusaders advancing up the Nile toward Cairo, and he dies. Think about what that means for a second. Mid-invasion, the heir, son, Turan Shah, is 1,000 miles away on the upper Tigris. If the army finds out the Sultan is dead, it can dissolve. If the emirs find out there is an empty throne, the knives come out and they start fighting. If Louis finds out, he's going to attack. So Shajar al Durr decides that nobody is going to find out. And I want to be very clear that this is not a metaphor. The plan is simple. The Sultan is alive because she says he is. That is the entire plan. Absolutely insane, but it's also going to work. So she brings in two people, the military commander and the chief eunuch. Together, they pull off the most audacious con in medieval history. Meals arrive on schedule the Sultan needs, or at least the food disappears. Doctors make visits. The Sultan is too ill for meetings. You understand, and is also dead, of course. Meanwhile, the paperwork flows. State documents go out signed with the dead man's signature, copied by a clerk who practiced until he could almost ghostwrite a man into existence. Orders flow out, including one that binds the entire military to swear loyalty to a dead man's teenage son, somewhere in Syria, who does not know any of this is happening. She is using a corpse seal to bind the future. For roughly 3 months, the only thing standing between a crusader's invasion in Cairo is a woman with no official position. Uh-huh, uh-huh. No title, no legal rights to exist in this role. She is running a government by puppet corpse. And it works. The army holds, the state functions, the secret gets carried north by fast courier. Your father is dead, come now, tell nobody. That was the message. And it works. For weeks, the thing standing between the crusade and Cairo is a woman in no official position, no army of her own, no legit right to do any of what she is doing, running a government through a dead man like a puppet. Let's get on to February 1250. The Crusaders find a fort across the channel protecting the Egyptian camp and launch an attack at dawn. It catches the Egyptians completely off guard. Fakhr al-Din, the commander, one of the three people on Earth who know the throne is empty, is in his bath having his beard touched up with henna when the Crusaders attack. He jumps at a horse, half dyed beard and all, rides out without armor and is killed almost immediately. The man dies still beautifying himself, carrying with him a third of the biggest secret in Egypt. Two co-conspirators left. And then the crusade throws away its own victory. The king's brother, Robert of Artus, ignores the battle plan and leads a charge straight into the town of Mansura itself. Narrow streets, cavalry. You kind of see the problem. Robert did not see the problem until it was too late, of course. The Bahri Mamluks, those enslaved soldiers from Rhode Island, let the knights right in. And then they seal the streets and take them apart one by one at their leisure. The Templars who rode in with Robert were almost entirely wiped out. Robert is killed, of course. One of the Mamluk officers in the fight is a young man named Baybars. Remember him too. He'll come back. Louis holds his ground and the war settles into a stalemate, which is when the Egyptians make a move that I need you to fully picture, okay? They take a fleet of galleys apart, load the pieces onto camels, carry them overland by camel, around the crusader position, and reassemble them on the Nile downstream. Behind the crusaders, between the army and its supply line to the Mida. Ships on camels, and it works perfectly. Somebody greenlit this heist movie. The supply boats from the Mida start getting captured, and the crusader camp begins to starve. So we know what happened next in the nauseating detail because Jean de Joinville, a young nobleman from Champagne who was actually there, got dysentery like everyone else, and decades later sat down and dictated his memories to someone who was writing them down. And Joinville does not spare you. No, no, no. Famine, scurvy, so bad the camp barbers are carving away dead gum so the soldiers can eat. Yay. The king is so sick he is barely sitting upright. Joinville does not add music to any of this, does not make it heroic, just writes it down the way it was. That is why he is useful to us. In early April of 1250, Louis finally orders a retreat downriver. It collapses almost immediately. At Ferriskur, the army is overrun and effectively annihilated. And Louis IX, King of France, future saint, is captured. A reigning King of France is now a prisoner in Egypt, and the price will be everything. The Mida returned, plus a ransom of 400,000 livres. Joinville says the sum was on the scale of the king's entire annual revenue. And the government collecting the ransom is still, officially, a man who has been dead since November. Oh yeah. Turinsa, the actual heir, finally arrives from the north, takes command for just in time for the final victory, and gets to ride in as the Sultan who captured the King of France. He has been handed the most secure throne in the world. His stepmother has held the state together for him, concealed his father's death, kept the army loyal, and gift-wrapped a won war. And it takes him about 10 weeks to get himself killed. And he earns every single day of it. What follows is a masterclass of alienating every stakeholder in the building, performed at speed with weapons. First, he starts replacing his father's official with cronies he brought from the north, which tells the entire establishment their careers are over. Then he starts threatening the Bahri Mamluks, the soldiers who just won the war. Yeah, there is a story in Arabic chronicles that he would get drunk and slash the tops of candles with his sword, announcing this is what he would do to the Bahris, and the Bahris heard about it, because of course they did. Threatening the best heavy cavalry on the planet via interpretive candle work. That's great decision making. Good job there. And then he turns on Shajar al Durr. He demands she hand over his father's treasure and her jewels. He threatens her, the woman who just saved the dynasty, threatened by the person she saved it for. No. So she does the reasonable thing. She lets the Mamluks know everything exactly how he talks about it. Sometimes revenge is just accurate quotation delivered to the right audience. A banquet at Ferris Bowery Mamluks attack Turan Shah at the table. Wounded, he flees to a wooden tower by the river. Of course, they set the tower on fire. He runs into the Nile, standing in the shallows, begging for his life, offering to abdicate, and they kill him in the water. So, a man credited with finishing it was the man credited with finishing it is Baybars. Remember him? Told you remember him. And here's the detail that tells you what kind of moment this was. One of the Mamluk commanders, Akutai, cut the heart off the body, carried it to where the king of France was being held prisoner, and presented it to him. What will you give me, he asked, for the heart of your enemy? Louis, by Joinville's account, was too horrified to say a single word. Joinville was nearby with the other prisoners, who spent the night fairly sure that they were next. The body was left lying in the river for days. That was the end of the Ayyubids in Egypt. The dynasty of Saladin ended face down in the Nile shallows, killed by his own slave soldiers because, pride and greed and all that. So now there is a genuine problem. The dynasty is dead. The army that killed it is made up of men who are all legally property. None of them has a credible claim. The states need a sovereign right now, mid-negotiation, with a captive king, and a crusader army still sitting in the meat. The Murs and Mamluks look around the room, and they choose her. No joke. In May 1250, Shajar al Durr is raised to the throne of Egypt, not as a regent, not as a placeholder, as an actual sovereign. The Friday prayers in every mosque in Cairo is now said in her name. That is the litmus test for real authority in this world, and she passes it. Coins are struck with her name on them. We still have those coins, and they are generally my favorite historical object in this entire story, because you can watch her solve an impossible constitutional problem in the space of a few words. She calls herself Queen of the Muslims. She makes a point of invoking loyalty to the caliph in Baghdad, which is clever because it says, I am not trying to end the caliphate system. I am just the one running Egypt today. And at the center of everything, she puts Caliph, mother of Caliph, her dead baby boy, the child she bore the previous sultan. She is building her entire claim to the throne on motherhood and grief, and she's putting it on coins. She's saying her legitimacy comes from the son who died, not from herself, which is the only argument available to her in that moment. It is grief weaponized into a constitutional argument that is also completely brilliant. Completely. A woman who is sold as a slave market is now the Sultan of Egypt, and she governs. She is the head of state who concludes the ransom of Louis IX and takes back the Mida. The Seventh Crusade, one of the largest and best funded military operations in medieval European history, is firmly wound down by a woman. And if you read Joinville, who was inside the negotiation as a prisoner, here's the thing that gets me. She barely registers. The deal, the money, the fear, the release, it's just all there in vivid detail, and the person ultimately presiding over the other side is essentially invisible to him. Keep that in your pocket for the historian fight, because who gets seen in this whole game, it is the entire stuff. It cannot last because the pressure comes from Baghdad. Abbasid Caliph Al-Mustasim is the man whose blessing makes sultans legitimate. And he is not blessing this. No, no, no. Can't have a woman doing this. The caliphate at this point controls roughly Baghdad and its own high opinion of itself. But the opinion still carries. There is a famous story. They sent Cairo a letter saying, "If you have no men left in Egypt, let us know. We will send you one." I will be honest with you, that line is reported by later chronicles and is a little too perfect. So file it next to Jenkins waving his ear at Parliament, okay? But the pressure was real. The scholars had a hadith ready to hand. The one that says no people who entrust their affairs to a woman will prosper. And the men around her had somewhere to point. Note that nobody had thought the quote of during the months when she was busy, saving every last one of them. But, when everything calms down, they like, oh, we can't let a woman do this. So, after roughly 80 days, she makes a deal that tells you she understood power than almost anyone else. She marries Ibek, a senior Mamluk commander, and he officially becomes Sultan on paper. She has handed over the throne. In practice, oh no, no. For the next 7 years, she keeps signing state papers, controls the money, and she makes him divorce the first wife he had, and the title went to him. Everything else stayed with her. It is like handing someone a scepter while you keep the keys to the treasury and the guards. 7 years later is when it all comes apart. And it comes apart over exactly the thing it was built on, a marriage. That was actually a power-sharing agreement between two people who did not trust each other, both of whom were kind of right not to trust each other. Of course, by 1257, Ibek wants out from under her. She controls the money. She runs the administration. The standard move is a marriage alliance. He picks the daughter of the ruler of Mosul. For Shajar al Durr, this is not a slight. It is an obituary. A new wife means a new faction, and a new faction means she is disposable. In April 1257, Ibek goes to bathe in the citadel of Cairo, and servants loyal to Shajar al Durr kill him in his bath. She announces that the Sultan died suddenly in the night. Oh no, don't know what happened. Unfortunately, nobody believes her. Ibek's own Mamluks do not believe her. His first wife certainly does not believe her. And his teenage son is raised to the throne by people who kind of want answers. It turns out that he died suddenly in the night, has a shelf life of about 4 days, when the entire citadel watched your marriage curdle in real time. Within days, she is a prisoner. And here is how the chronicles describe the ending. And I want you to notice that you are reading this as a story someone chose to tell. And so we're going to talk about why. The story goes, she grinds all her jewels into powder so no other woman can ever wear them. She is handed over to the slave woman of Ibek's first wife, the one she forced him to divorce. Those women beat her to death with the wooden bathroom clogs and throw her body into a ditch below the citadel, where it sits unburied for days. It is a perfect story. A little too perfect. There are too many layers of irony stacked on top of each other. A woman who came from slavery dies by the hands of slaves. A woman who killed a man in a bathhouse dies by bathhouse shoes. It is shaped so neatly that every historian's alarm bells is going off in maximum volume. Killed by enslaved women, bathhouse shoes, and orders of the household after ruling Egypt, the symmetry is so perfect, the irony is so neatly machined that a historian's alarm bells should be going off somewhere. Which brings us to the fight. Fight number 1. Does she camp? I know it sounds like trivial, and it is actually a fight about how you frame the entire next era of the Middle Eastern history. The Mamluk Sultanate that follows the Ayyubids' rules Egypt, and Syria for 250 years, crushes the Mongols, and finishes off the Crusaders. So when does the Mamluk era start? If you count from May 1250, the entire empire of slave soldiers was founded by a woman who used to be enslaved. If you start with Ibak, or with the generals who took over in 1260, then she becomes an interlude, a regent, a weird moment that does not quite fit. Some medieval histories just skip her entirely. The coins have her name. The Friday prayers were said in her name. The entire state recognized her, and historians are still arguing about whether she counts. 800 years later, and the field cannot decide whether to acknowledge her? That's the first fight. Fight number 2. Every Arabic source we have of her was written by men, employed by the people who came after her. Our best source is Ibn Wessel, who was close to these events, knew the people, and wrote the backbone of what we know about the Seventh Crusade. He also collected paychecks from Ayyubid rulers and then switched to the Mamluks and thrived, becoming an ambassador for Baybars. You know, the general Baybars, that one in the river. Ibn Mossel is not lying, but every sentence he writes about Shajar al Durr comes from a man whose livelihood depended on the Mamluk regime. And the Mamluk regime's legitimacy depends entirely on how he tells her story. So he is writing in a kind of conflict of interest you can see from space. He is the most trustworthy and most suspicious source simultaneously. That is the whole problem with eyewitness testimony. Here is fight number 3. The dust scene, the clogs, the powdered jewels, the body in the ditch. The further a chronicle is from 1257, the better the scene gets. The major source most people quote for the most lurid version is a writing a century and a half later. Modern scholars have been traced her through the chronicles, point out that she gets processed through a ready-made genre, the dangerous woman who rises too far and is punished by exactly what she was. And the gruesome poetic ending is what the genre demands. Did she die violently in 1257 after Ibek's murder? Almost certainly. Were the instruments literally bathhouse clogs wielded by the first wives' slave girls? That detail is doing so much narrative work that you can practically hear it straying. It is too perfect. It has too many layers of irony. And further you get from 1257, the more elaborately written this becomes. Hold it exactly the way you held Jenkins' ear. Not at all. And then you have fight number 4, which is the one that made me want to do this episode. In 2020, an architectural historian named D. Fairchild Ruggles published the first full-length book study of Shajar al Durr in English, and her move is gorgeous. If the chronicles were all written by men with motives, stop treating the chronicles as the only archive. Read the buildings, because Shajar al Durr built. She built a domed tomb for al-Sahir and attached it to her madrasa in the busiest street in Cairo, putting her husband's dynastic cult and her own rule as its keeper physically in everyone's daily path. She built her own mausoleum, and inside it, the niche that orients every prayer said in that room, there is a glass mosaic of a tree hung with the mother of a pearl. A tree of pearls, her name, in stone and glass, in the one medium of her enemies could not revise. You cannot footnote a building into silence. Chronicles are what other people said about her. The buildings are the place she still speaks in her own voice. Ruggles argues you cannot understand her or honestly the Mamluk architecture that comes after her without starting there. My take? The chroniclers and the buildings are both telling the truth about something. The chronicles tell you what her world needed her story to mean, that it was unnatural and it could not last. The buildings tell you what she wanted to be true, that she was the widow of a sultan, the mother of a sultan's son, and the author of her own movement. We do not get to pick the more convenient architecture. We have to stand in the middle and look both ways. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Shajar al Durr ran Egypt 3 separate times. Once in secret, through a dead man's signature, once in public with her name on coins and in the Friday prayers, and once from behind a husband through the treasury and the paperwork. 3 different shapes of the same power. And the record we inherited was written, every word of it, by people with reasons to make the public version look like it's wrong, like it's abnormal or rare. She seems to have understood that because she answered in advance. In the only medium that does not take revisions, the chroniclers got the last word about her. The buildings got the last word about the chronicles. 8 centuries later, her mausoleum is still standing in Cairo with her name still in a prayer niche, which means that every single day she wins the argument again. And one more thing, the caliph in Baghdad, al-Mustasim, the man whose office sneered that Egypt should send a man, Shajar al Durr died in the spring of 1257. Within a year, an army of the likes of which the world had never seen arrived outside the caliph's walls, and he discovered that nobody was going to send him help. Yeah, that is this episode of The Fire, and I am Dr. Angie. This is the Snarkives. The sources are in the notes, like always. Thank you for listening.